Okay, Mr. Marshall, you have a quorum of the board. Amherst Media is with us here in the house. Nate Malloy is with us tonight too. You are the co-host of this meeting. It is in and around 6:33. I think we're good to go.
All right, thank you, Pam.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of February 4th, 2026. My name is Doug Marshall, and as chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I am calling this meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, and further extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, this planning board meeting will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda, posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting. Or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda where the Zoom link is listed at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event public access is disrupted for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the town's website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and return to mute. Bruce Colden.
I'm here.
Brett Hartwell.
I am here.
Jesse Major.
I'm present.
I, Doug Marshall, am present. Angus McLeod.
Present.
Johanna Newman.
Here.
And Jarrah Smith has told us he is under the weather and probably will not be attending. He is not here at this point. Board members, if technical issues arise and the discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment, and I will call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. To the general public. The general public comment item on tonight's agenda is reserved for public comment regarding items not appearing later on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during this meeting when deemed appropriate by the planning board chair. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can typically express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation may be disconnected from the meeting. All right, I guess that took 3 minutes. We're up to 6:36. We'll start with the minutes for approval from past meetings. We have 2 minutes to discuss tonight. It looks, Bruce, you've raised your finger as though you want to say something before we get to the minutes.
No, I thought there was only one, and I was raising my hand to comment on the one, but I didn't see a second there.
Oh, okay. Well, I saw August 6th and November 19th.
Okay, maybe I got in early, or so, I don't know. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah,
I will comment when appropriate on the August minutes.
Okay. Well, we will start with the August 6th minutes. Are there any comments, Bruce?
Yes, simply, Kathy Shane is mentioned twice as making a public comment, and her name is spelled Kathy with a K, and in fact it's Kathy with a C. So that's on the first public comment on page 3, and then at the very top on page 5. Those are the 2 instances where her name is not properly spelled. Otherwise, I had no further to say.
All right, thank you.
Got it.
Anybody else? Any comments? Jesse?
Oh, I was just going to move that we accept the minutes.
All right, great. Johanna?
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further comments? All right. Well, guess we'll go ahead with a vote, starting with you, Bruce.
Aye.
This is a motion to accept as amended by this comment, by
Right.
Bruce's comments. All right, thank you, Bruce. You were in favor. Fred,
Aye.
Angus,
Aye.
Jesse,
Aye.
Johanna,
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. 6 in favor, 1 member absent. All right, second set of minutes, November 19th. Did most people see those, that they were in fact in the packet? So, all right, good. Johanna?
I was going to move to adopt these minutes.
All right, thank you. Fred?
Yeah, the adder is that paragraph that was put in at the end. And I just wanted to say at this moment that regarding Mr. Mora's challenge, I did research this, and it appears that Amherst adopted zoning in 1925, and this parcel took its current form in 1922. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It doesn't change the outcome in any way.
All right, thank you. Would anybody like to second Bruce? Second the motion. It was Johanna's motion, I believe.
Yep.
Jesse, you wiggled your fingers. Maybe
Sure.
I'll recognize you as second.
Yep, I'll second.
Okay, thank you all. No other comments? Fred, I assume your hand is a legacy. Great. Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. This time I'll go in the opposite order of the alphabetical of your last names. So starting with you, Johanna.
I approve the minutes.
All right, Jesse.
Approve. Aye.
All right, Angus.
Aye.
And Fred.
Aye.
And Bruce.
I will go an aye, despite my initial declaration of dereliction.
Probably haven't read them.
I did actually, because I realized when I saw them that it was the minutes we've already reviewed, and I knew what was going on at the end. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, and I'll vote aye as well. That's 6 in favor, 1 absent. That motion passes. Both sets of minutes are approved. All right, thank you. Time is 6:41. We'll go to the public comment period. At this point, so I see 2 attendees among the public, and this is the time for either of you to raise your hands and let us know that you want to make a public comment. The names that I read or that I see are Andy Churchill, I assume the town councilor, and Rob, which is probably Rob Moore, I would guess. So I don't see hands from either of them to give public comment. So I guess we will go ahead and move on. All right, third item. Nate, housing production plan, review and discuss the implementation matrix. I'll give you the floor.
Sure, yeah, thanks everyone. I'll share my screen momentarily. I think, this was an opportunity for, planning board members just to identify priorities they might want to, or strategies from the production plan they might want to prioritize. And, my thought would be over the next meeting or two, the planning board could refine this and then, offer, recommendations to the housing and zoning subcommittee to work on something. I'm still hoping that, in the next few months, we could meet with, or, representatives of the planning board, or maybe it's the subcommittee, can meet with the housing trust and with the CRC. Excuse me.
Nate, who are the CRC representatives in this term of the council?
Andy Churchill, Mandy Joe, Haneke, Alicia Walker, Jennifer Taub, and Pam Rooney.
Okay.
And so, and then I couldn't name all the trust members, unfortunately. There's some new members. But I think, the idea would be just to coordinate efforts. And so, for instance, if from tonight we're like, oh, we like the idea, planning board's like, I like the idea of infill in residential neighborhoods, we might need to then work on what that means, and then we could go to the trust and explain that and see what they might think. Maybe they have some ideas to help with this effort, or maybe they would pick up some outreach and education component, or something else. And so just to kind of coordinate that, and then with the CRC as well, again, what kind of what's the next 6 months, 12 months look like. There's so many strategies in the housing production plan, and it'd take a long time to implement them all. So with that, I'll share my screen. If this is visible for folks,
Yep.
this is kind of the number of votes for each strategy. There was a few that had 3, and then here are the strategies below. I guess so most of the planning board members stuck with the theme A, which is kind of the land use priorities. I guess one question I had for members, no one selected the strategy that would be a 40R. And so most people didn't select that one. And I guess I'd be curious to know why, or if there are any questions about 40R, or why that, why other strategies were selected. And then, like we can see, A2 had the most votes, and it's upzone residential districts and redefine apartment uses. And D1 was the next one, encourage the development of more student and workforce housing. And so, these strategies offer, kind of a broad kind of vision, but not the details. And so, tonight I was thinking we just have a conversation about what are some of the, first, do we agree on 1 or 2 of these as a priority, and then what exactly does it mean? A1, some of these are somewhat are similar, right? So A1 is upzone residential districts town-wide to create missing middle housing. And so it's slightly different, right, than A2, but sometimes it's, I think if we say missing middle, it's like, well, then what is it, and how do we get there through zoning? Or what, if it's not zoning, what is the board, how does the board want to get there? Is it through other bylaws or other recommendations, whether it's to town council or someone else? Is it like some financing mechanism?
Do you want us to answer you now or later?
Maybe in a minute. I guess I was just going to go through like
Okay.
A3 and A5, where the next highest vote getters, facilitate infill development and adaptive reuse where appropriate, and amend the cluster development method to increase subdivision density and flexibility, which I think we've already identified as kind of this new traditional subdivision method. So I think that's something that we could continue to work on. And I guess I'll leave it at that. I guess I'd be kind of curious to hear why or why not 40R, and maybe it's that some of these other strategies could be a 40R, but it wasn't explicitly identified as a priority. So.
All right. I guess since I don't see any other hands, I'll just start. I have never gravitated to the 40R and the other 40s, frankly, just because they feel inflexible and cumbersome, and a little bit of a challenge to really understand what they are and how they would work. Maybe I just need to spend more time studying it, but to me, upzoning residential districts was probably my first, one of my first 2. A2 and D1 were probably the first 2 that I listed. A1, I didn't like that one because I don't want to upzone every residential area in town. I would rather upzone selected areas for missing middle where I think missing middle might belong. So that one didn't, if I couldn't accept that the way it was written, at least. And in general, I would say I limited myself to topics that were identified as the planning board could have an impact on them. I didn't see any point in wasting our effort on advocating for somebody else to do something that's something they should do and not us. I think I will say, although I did say it in the email to you, Nate, I thought we were going to pick from the list of zoning things that you had prepared rather than this list. So I was a little bit surprised at that. But that's where I came down. I don't remember what the third one was, but I thought we should deal with things that we can flexibly zone in response to an objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of this, if we identify one or two priorities here from the plan, it would go on that zoning list, right? And so, and we identify one as like a short-term thing to work on in the next 6 months, or are they a little bit bigger things that take a year? And so that's kind of where I, start here and move it over. Yeah, it's interesting with 40R. I think we tried it in the downtown a number of years ago, and it didn't work because we'd already upzoned downtown, so there wasn't really any incentive to give to a developer, unless we were gonna, they could already do a pretty big build out and bigger buildings, and so, you do a 40R typically over an area where you can't do much right now, or maybe you can't even do apartments or townhouses or commercial, or mixed use buildings. And then you put a 40R over it, and what it says is that it's a site plan review with design guidelines, and 20 or 25% of the units have to be affordable. So it's basically like a comprehensive permit district. So the developer would come in, and if you have a 40R, they'd say, "Oh, I'm going to do," if they use the 40R district and they meet your design guidelines, it's pretty much a yes, right? You can't say no. But the idea is that we would have identified that area as an appropriate place for, say, more density and affordable units.
Yeah, I mean, I was here when we tried that,
right.
at the north end of downtown, and I guess I'll confess that I've always been kind of ambivalent about the affordable housing requirements. I understand that it's a worthy objective, and it's a state program that can do that. The fact that it's open-ended and you're basically guaranteeing forever that you're going to have a affordable unit, but it comes with all this state sort of the framework where you have to be assessing people's income and that kind of stuff. It's just felt like a very cumbersome program to me. And I'd rather focus on how we can enable the market to develop to produce more housing. And so it just has never really appealed. All right, we have 3 other people who'd like to talk. Angus, you're next.
Sure. So yeah, I think this is it's helpful to see where other people kind of are thinking about priorities. And I think there's a lot of echoing on this Excel spreadsheet that we've got in front of us with the zoning priorities that we're thinking about in this subcommittee and that the staff are thinking about. And I'll just point out a couple of things that I think are really promising. I'm looking at both documents right now. And in addition to what Nate already mentioned about cottage style zoning, I'm thinking about kind of, changing the cluster development approach that we have in the zoning bylaws, and increasing both density and flexibility for some of that development. We're also thinking about modifying mixed-use building standards and outlying village centers, which is upzoning residential districts for higher density residential use. In the staff line, they've got update apartment definition, which I think would be great, to create, an option for medium and larger apartment complexes. We've got a couple of other points, where we're thinking about trying to upzone, and facilitate infill development around major thoroughfares in town, which I think is also great. So to me, that we're already thinking in these terms with a lot of the zoning. priorities that we've been contemplating. I think the piece that is missing that Jesse and others have mentioned is really the student housing piece, which is on the zoning priority list, but I'm not sure that we have a clear sense of what action we can take apart from trying to increase supply, which is one thing within our capacity. And I think this goes to Jesse's, question about trying to create limits or regulations on spacing of student housing, that kind of thing, which is something for us to discuss later.
All right, thanks, Angus. Bruce?
Like you, Doug, I thought that we were being asked initially to look at the priority list that Nate et al. Have put together and to work on that. This because we already had our priorities, so we seem to be zooming back out to somebody else's list, and I'm vaguely aware that that might be useful, but it didn't strike me as being a good use of time, because this is a big, broad list that's made by somebody else who talked to us among other people, of course, and it's a list that's made by somebody else. So I don't know what half of these comments mean, and we've already kind of found that out in here as we say, what does upzoning residential districts mean, and all this kind of stuff. Our list has got more specific statements in it that we've made, and we know what it means. That's where we should be spending our time, I think. And I've been encouraging Nate, or trying to, for quite a few weeks or months now, to actually get that list into a tight, nicely written list, rather than just a collection of phrases and half phrases that are somewhat repetitive and so forth. I think that's where we should be spending our time, I think, Nate. I want your list to be made into a good list. I want it to be properly written, properly edited, and then we can look at it and then we can prioritize it. But this doesn't work for me because I don't understand what half of it's about in enough detail for me to make sense of it. But overall, it seems to me that the obvious thing that we have to deal with is student housing, because we've got data that says that we're trying to accommodate 9,000 students, which maybe is over 2,000 houses, in a town which has got 13,000 residents, it seems. It just seems to me that dealing with the student housing, one way or another, whether it's trying to build it off campus or exercising whatever influence we may have to get the university to take a different, to reprioritize their efforts in that regard. I know that that the general consensus is that that's a waste of time. I don't think it is, because the problem is so great that it can't be a waste of time. It has to be the essential solution, I think, along with whatever we can do. So that's where my priorities are, and I don't know that I felt that this was a terribly useful exercise.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Jesse, and then Fred.
Thanks. Without being too redundant, Angus and Bruce basically just summarized what I would want to say. I'm realizing when I see this list, I was remiss in even sending my votes here, because I did pick some priorities and I got to the same point in my brain that those two gentlemen just expressed, which was nothing here addressed what I see as the main problem. And that's what it has to go in parallel. I agree with many of these things. I also agree with Bruce said that these are sort of vague aspirations and nothing really concrete. But I do agree that we need several of these points, and probably I would have ranked them in similar order if in parallel we were also really working on the student housing issue. And it's just missing from the conversation. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll
All
stop
right.
there.
Well, so D1 would be your preference in this list, because that's the one that mentions student housing.
Yes, but at the same time, student and workforce housing are very different. What keeps coming in the conversation in various ways is owner occupancy.
Yep.
And that never goes anywhere. Like, I never hear us or getting actual information about what we're allowed to require. How can we design things that lead towards ownership for the missing middle, for low starter homes, for all these kinds of things, it never goes anywhere. And that's different, very different from student housing. And yes, we need both. And I think we have to try and attack them in parallel and think about which parts of town we might try and encourage different developments. But we haven't even got to a place where we have a model for encouraging starter home ownership, right? That I see as a real problem. I agree, we should rethink apartments and different types of density. But also, as you all know, I think critical in that is defining a student home so we can intelligently talk about what we're talking about. Because without naming it, how do you plan for it? Okay, I'm gonna stop.
All right. Jesse, I guess I'll comment on a couple of things about that you said. One is, we have had conversation in the last few meetings about the sort of tiny little subdivision model, which I view as basically targeted at workforce housing and starter homes. So we have done that. And then, I think any area that we decided to upzone for greater development near the university would almost de facto become student housing. So we could do that. We could say, any parcels within, 1,000 feet of the university's main campus, we're going to upzone for 6 stories, whatever. I mean, pick your details. If we did that and actually proposed that, the chances are most of anything that happened in there would be targeted at students, and maybe there'd be a little bit for junior faculty or something, but
If I may reply,
yeah, sure.
I totally agree. We've had those
Please.
conversations. What I think is missing is the ability to figure out how to separate some and have it not be student rented. Because I agree, anything in any of our town right now that gets built will be student rentals. I feel like there's no question about that. I think most of us agree with that, just because of the moment we're in. And if we want to encourage or design things, allow somehow zone for things that would be starter homes, there has to be a mechanism for non-student homes. And that's the piece that's missing. That's what I'm trying to express. And the subcommittee tried that, went nowhere. And,
Okay.
and that's what I was trying to ask last time we met, if the planning board felt similar to me or not.
Okay. I guess I'll say in response to that, you can unmute again. I personally feel like we have a serious problem with student demand, and that we should not let the workforce housing slow us down from solving the student demand. So whatever we think we can do for student demand, let's go ahead and do it, and not let the workforce issue impede.
Totally agree. Totally agree. But then let's call it what it is.
Okay.
Let's not say we're going to try and have more student and workforce housing, because that's not what we're going to do.
Right.
We're going to try to have more student housing.
I think you're right.
I'm fine with that if we call it what it is.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Good. All right. Thank you, Jesse. Fred.
Well, I was the one vote for D1. And I was the one vote for D1 because I agree with Bruce's arguments and I agree with Jesse's arguments. And I thought that's what I was voting for when I voted for D1. I guess this is all in how you structure the language of the choice.
Well, Fred, there were 3 of us that voted for D1. I know I was one of them.
Oh, I thought
So under number of votes there.
Oh yeah, there was 3. There was 3. Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah, well, that
you
was
were not
why
alone.
I voted for D1.
Yeah, and my D1 is number 1 D1.
All right, Fred, are you all set, or you're thinking?
Yeah, the one where I was one vote was A7. I was the one vote on A7 on
Mhm.
available land, and uh, I don't know how you're going to solve these problems without looking at that. But anyway,
Mhm.
I'll let it go at that.
Okay. Thank you, Fred. Nate, so I don't see any more hands at the moment. You've heard a little conversation. How do you want to go from here?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for all your comments. I mean, Bruce, I hear what you're saying. However, I'd say that, kind of analogous to what Angus said, we're already working on some of these. And I think what we just had as a conversation about a few things that if we could distill from that, what are the priorities? I hear, like student housing issues. So to me, then it's like, okay, if we keep drilling down, what does that mean? Is it allowing student housing places? Is it then also regulating them or regulating student homes from other parts of town? I hear kind of like being able to get moderately priced, fee simple home ownership units. And so, okay, maybe we're already doing that with this new kind of cluster style subdivision. And so, to me, this is a fruitful exercise in that, right, these are just kind of generic strategies presented by the consultant, but then to me, it's on us then to say, okay, what do we mean by this? What do we mean by upzone residential districts for high density residential development? So they don't give us a metric for high density. Is that, 10 units an acre? Is it 6? Is it 30? And then where is that appropriate? And so then that's where we would take, have a conversation and say, okay, really, we're going to look at maybe BVC and RVC. And we already allow, say, 3-story buildings, but we think we should allow apartments with an unlimited number of units in 4 stories in those districts. Right, I'm saying, for instance, and that is to me the high density residential thing, and we redefine apartments. Or we kind of focus on this student and workforce housing and talk about it a little bit more. I think it's a staff ever since when Jeff's come on board, and then since the last planning board meeting, it was nice to, I think it was a really great conversation last meeting. I think there was a lot said, and it's kind of like, taking all that and figuring out what are some action steps from it. And we're still trying to figure that out. I hear you about student homes, and then owner occupancy is different. And I just want to make sure it's really hard to zone for some and for the others. And so, yeah, I don't, we've been having conversations with staff and with different officials and trying to figure out what's the kind of right approach or what are some ideas. And so I think I think the conversation is going to keep coming back, and I think we are aware it's a priority. So I feel like it's something.
So Nate, are you trying to redirect us? Because I do kind of share some of the feelings that Bruce expressed, and in that we already have that other list of what we've been talking about, and we have, we were working on the North Amherst district, and I heard Jeff last week that maybe that's not the most fruitful thing for us to work on at the moment, but we're kind of in the middle of a lot of another conversation that had to do with some of those other things, and so yeah, the housing production plan has arrived. Are you trying to get us to refocus in a different way?
No, let me share the
And Angus, I saw your finger there.
Do you mind if I just interject briefly, Doug?
sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think is useful about what Nate is doing with us here about the HPP, about the housing production plan, is it's in part creating a link between these zoning priorities and the document that the town council and that lots of other stakeholders have already approved, right? Like they have approved the housing production plan. They have not approved anything on this list that we're about to talk about. Now, in approving the housing production plan, it's a menu that we're supposed to draw on. And so to me, the valuable thing of what we're doing here, and I agree that it's good to shift over to the zoning priorities, is when we type up, or when Nate and the planning department type up what Bruce is asking for, a more detailed version of this zoning priorities document, I hope that it'll mention which of the housing production plan priorities they link up to, because I think that helps us establish kind of where we're coming at these problems from and build
Right.
support for our interventions.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead, Nate.
Oh, yeah, no, I think you're right. I also want to be realistic, like how much can staff and the planning board and subcommittee take on? But so that's why, I shifted to this list. So really I'm trying to, give us a timeline. So if we like this new subdivision method, planning board, give the direction to the subcommittee and really work on it, and goal, try to get a draft zoning amendment in draft form by May, and then staff is going to be working on, all these other things for May. At the same time, the subcommittee could be working on these few other things that we want to then get into zoning amendment form by the end of the year. And, perhaps the one priority from the HPP, I mean, these are already priorities from the HPP. It was just, is there another one, right? That could be something that the subcommittee is working on or the full planning board is working on. With the reality that even if, say, we get all these things ready, the planning board recommends them to the council in May, they might only want to refer a few of them back. And it just, there's a process, right? So we can start talking about it now. These might not get voted on, even if they get to the council in like June, they might not be voted on as a zoning, to get in the zoning bylaw until the, December. And so I think what staff has realized that sometimes it's over a year before there's any zoning amendments adopted or really brought to council. And so we want to try to create a little bit more of a workflow for that. And maybe it's just, maybe we have to pare this down even more, but the idea is to like, let's prioritize a few things that we can really push. And Bruce, to your comment about writing this up again, I'm not going to write any more than this. If someone is unclear what this means, I would rather just jump right into the zoning language. And part of that is we have an intent, a purpose, a goal statement, and it'll come out of the zoning amendment. I don't want to spend more time writing a document to summarize this. Like if we don't know what, modified mixed use building standards is, someone else can do it, right? To me, it's like, what does that mean? We had a different standard in New Drive. We've heard we want less than 30%. If we think this is a priority, planning board, tell the zoning subcommittee or the board, you want to work on this, right? For October, what does it mean to have modified mixed use building standards? I feel like in the last few months, I've heard from a number of property owners and developers, 30% doesn't work. They have trouble getting financing. Space is going to sit vacant. Is that, what do we do with that? Do we change it? Do we keep it 30% in BG or BL? Do we have it, so to me, it's like, I think that's something that would actually be beneficial. And these are going to be really big, downtown design standards and East Amherst 40R. So those are things that we hope the planning board will actually, dedicate meeting time to this year to keep them moving forward. Clean energy bylaw, it was the solar bylaw. It's now clean energy because it talks about battery energy storage systems. The state is saying, just like ADUs, we have to have something in place this year. It's going to be a really big lift. It'll come to the board at some point. And then here's all these other things, housing in the PRP. I'd love to kind of keep that moving. We have these temporary uses, which we've talked about, and then we have these technical amendments. And that's kind of a lot to do in the next, say, 4 to 6 months, but I'd like to try to keep some momentum. At the same time, maybe we're, looking at these other things for later in the year. And it's a lot, right? And the student housing issues, I'm not even sure what limits and regulations are right now, but I think it's something that we've heard, the board's mentioned it enough, we've heard it from the public. And so it's starting to try to figure out, okay, right, if we have this new subdivision method, for instance, do we have some kind of owner occupancy requirement or something, right? Like that could fulfill that kind of goal. And I don't really know how it could work. Sometimes legally it's a little tricky. But anyway, so to me, this list is trying to give us a shape for the next year because, it does take a while. And I also want to maybe be more efficient. I heard the board say that UDrive could have gone faster, which is really interesting. And so now it's telling me, well, no, because during the process, I wasn't sure. I mean, I was going to CRC one meeting 1 week, planning board next week, and that was like months of my time going to meeting after meeting. And so if we think it could be more efficient, I'd love to hear it. Staff has kind of talked about it. Say we get this kind of to a zoning amendment form, do we go to CRC? Some of the ideas is like, do we go to CRC early this year and say, hey, here's what we're working on. We don't really have much to it, but just so you know, and we keep them more periodically updated. So when this becomes a zoning amendment, it's not like, it's totally new for them. They've kind of been following along. And anyway, so to me, yeah, I don't, maybe we already have enough from the HPP. I just wasn't sure, because it's a big document. And as Angus said, it was just adopted. It has a lot in there. Is there something we thought we want to peel off of from there? And maybe we're already doing it. So we don't have to go back to it if we don't think it's useful. I was kind of curious to see where board members might, push, right? What if someone is like, I really like this strategy and it wasn't anything we were considering here? I say, okay, let's talk about it a bit more, but ironically, it wasn't, right? It was like the things that we're already even talking about. So,
Okay. All right, Jesse and then Bruce.
Thanks. So as you just went through the list you're showing now, again, from my view, the priority is just a little out of order. I love these things for our town. Figure out cluster development, subdivision in traditional neighborhoods, cottage style zoning, fantastic. But we all have to admit, if they get built tomorrow, they will be student rentals. And I don't want us to spend a lot of time imagining how to zone this to get small homes that someone could buy and move in, a new family, a staff, a new faculty, whatever, when I think the reality is that's not what would happen tomorrow or even next year or in 2 years. And Nate, you even said the student housing issue is way on the bottom of the list and we don't know how to address it. That's what we need to do first. Like that, I mean, that's my perspective is staff and council and town manager and planning board need to figure out how we can address this if we want to address it. Because I don't feel like there's a lot of desire to actually address it. That's my frustration, right? Again, I like all these ideas. I'm happy to work on them, but we also have to call out what it is that's the priority. And I think this is out of order. And I tried to ask Jeff that directly last time also, and he didn't have a good answer either. He kind of talked around the question, are we going to work on student housing? Well, eventually, but that's what's been happening for 30 years here, right? And here we are.
Bruce.
I substantially agree with Jesse, but Nate, this is a better list. This is clear, and it doesn't have items mixed the way the other one did, and I can see the order and so forth. I don't entirely agree with you that that each of these couldn't have a paragraph that or a short or a long sentence that described essentially what the goal or objective was, or described it a little clearer. I don't think you need to write more than that, but I think it would help. But I can live with it the way it is. That's fine. But what I find frustrating is exactly what Jesse said, that we seem to have decided apparently that the North Amherst initiative that we had put so much time and effort into is no longer on this list. As I said some time ago, I think we need to fail at that before we drop it. Because it's overwhelmingly the thing that the problem we need to, it's the most challenging problem, and putting our head in the sand is not a good way to deal with it. I think it should be, we need to die on this hill, at least, and be seen to be trying to deal with it. And if we go down in flames in North Amherst, at least it wasn't because we ignored the problem, and we can maybe learn something about how we can succeed in persuading the town that high density student housing, if it's not going to be off campus, on campus, it has to be off campus. And in my general sense, it has to be both. So I think number one on the subcommittee is some version of pursuing the North Amherst overlay. And otherwise, I'm good with everything else.
Doug, can I jump in?
Sure, Nate.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So yeah, I think the goal purpose for each of these, I think would be great for, say, I can start working on the ones for staff, and if the subcommittee wants to, if we reorganize this, work on them for the others. And so to me, that goal purpose statement is then part of the zoning amendment. So I agree, I think it would be good to have that, but I don't want to duplicate it and have it be, say, a narrative. I'd rather have it be part of, say, the zoning amendment form itself, where we have a goal or purpose, intent, applicability, and kind of just write it as if it would then be part of that zoning amendment.
Right.
Yeah, the student piece, I mean, I think the idea is that this, although it's low on the list, it's something that we'll be working on this year. It's also on the agenda for later. I hear you. Yeah, it's interesting, Jesse. Sometimes I wonder, right, if we say did this traditional neighborhood subdivision method, right? Really small lots, 5,000 square foot lots. We could do 0 lot lines, and someone comes in and they develop a property and they do like a 30 lot subdivision. Who would the end user be? Is it, by the idea, it's like, it's akin to the 40Y. The idea is that because the lots are small, the homes would be smaller, so they're in essence more affordable. But I don't know, given the market in Amherst. And so I think, I've spoken with Jeff and staff. The student thing it is tricky. I feel like we're getting ready to, I feel like we're, trying to get some ideas going. It's a really difficult thing through zoning typically. And it's like, you don't want to say owner occupancy on everything, because you could have, non-students rent units. And so the occupancy can help, say, with like a duplex or certain things. So yeah, like I said, I feel like we've talked about different things on this issue, and maybe we elevate it on this list, and maybe, we move it up to the subcommittee or something. I just don't know that it would generate a zoning amendment, say maybe that's a goal. Like, do we try to have a zoning amendment by the end of the year related to the student issue? And we get rid of this thing because we're already doing it. And, we could put like, student housing here, and it's, and those are the 4 things that the subcommittee works on. And we can always reorganize this list, but it's like, okay, that gives us some structure for this year, because a year will go by fast. And yeah, so anyways, I just, like, I don't know, like the minimum distancing, do we like look at that again, or do we look at whatever it is? A bunch of things at the subcommittee level. And then the idea would be subcommittee does some homework, we bring it back to the subcommittee, then back to the board and say, okay, here's like 4 strategies we looked at. Can we move one forward in any way, whether it's a general bylaw, is it through the rental permitting program, gets amended to that? Is it a zoning amendment? So I feel like if we think that's a priority, to me, after this meeting, this would be the chance to say, yeah, let's put it here, tell the subcommittee to work on it. Subcommittee supposed to meet, I think, next week or in a week and a half. They can pick it up, they come back to the planning board in March, and we try to start, keeping it moving a little bit. Or the subcommittee talks about it for 2 meetings and comes back at the end of March and presents the planning board with, here's kind of the research we've done, what do we think? So we don't have to get down to the details tonight unless we want to, but the idea is to try to get kind of the framework here, and maybe this is the change we want, right? We want to see.
Well, it certainly sounds like at least the subcommittee would like to work on that.
Yep.
So can you tell me what the difference is between the cottage style and the traditional neighborhood?
Yeah, so I know, I was trying to come up
Those
with
look awfully similar to me.
So this is a subdivision method, right? Where you're creating, new lots with roadways, right? So it's like, I'll just say a 5,000 square foot lot, 50 by 100, do a 20-foot wide road, and you can get, nice small lots. Cottage style zoning in the housing production plan or in other kind of planning documents, cottage style would be you have one big property and you put multiple units on that property, whether it's 8 tiny homes around a center courtyard, or you kind of minimize a big house and you have a few other smaller houses, or something like that. So it's typically cottage style. I mean, we could put housing is on one property. It could be fee simple, but it's really difficult, and it's not a subdivision method. It's not trying to create new lots. It's taking existing lots. Say you have an acre property on Lincoln, and we like this, and we say, well, you can get 8 units on that property if they are this style. Maybe it's, townhouse style with design guidelines, or it's, a mix of something. So that's what the cottage style to me means.
So has the subcommittee talked about that very much? Or how did that get on this list?
It's been talked about at various times, and it's just never been researched enough. And so, is the housing production plan mentioned it? We've talked about the infill and increased density in residential neighborhoods. And so to me, this is like, okay, is this kind of what it means? Because we're not trying to create new lots. We're trying to figure out how to have infill. And maybe this changes. Maybe this is just, maybe the housing subcommittee is like, we'd rather see townhouses more, or row houses like we talked about, and that becomes this. But this was a unique style that it's been mentioned a bunch, and it's just
Okay. Angus.
Yeah, I don't have a comment on the cottage style housing. I was gonna echo what Bruce had said about North Amherst, and I wanted to maybe ask Nate a more pointed question. Is the planning department's view that the North Amherst overlay is unlikely to be viable, like politically viable, and so we should stop working on it?
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a possibly, right. So it may not get the votes, and I hear what Bruce is saying. I think some of the idea would be like at the subcommittee we talked about. Jesse too said, right, like maybe when East Amherst moves forward, if there's new zoning amendment out of the study this year, we bring back North Amherst at the same time. And that's kind of what I've been thinking, is that we don't necessarily give up on it. I think there was a lot of good work that was put into it. And so the idea would be, if we come back, we have this consultant we're going to select in the next few months, spend 10 months looking at East Amherst, and what if next year the idea is, oh, we have some new ideas to rezone East Amherst. Well, let's have a parallel track and come back with North Amherst or areas around campus. And so it's a balancing act of like different approaches to allowing housing. So maybe East Amherst is a different, targeted a different group and demographics, and then we have these overlays for students. I think if we do it on its own, I think there will be a lot of questions and opposition to North Amherst right now. Bruce said he had talked to Cinda, and there were some ideas about, could you allow density on parts of the property, because a lot of owners may not actually want to tear down their development. It's complex and financially, and so to do the 3 times density might not actually work. And so I talked to another owner, and it was kind of the same sentiment. And so if an outside partner came in, maybe, but these owners are not, they're saying it's just too much for them to have this phased approach, the financing, and possibly lose 2 or 3 years of rent on a third of their units and then do the next third. And so North Amherst, to me, I still think if you look at the town, it is a logical place to have increased density. There's already a lot of density there. I think there's questions about what is too dense, traffic and other impacts. I think that could all be discussed. So I don't want to give up on it. I think, Bruce had said, do we write letters to the editor in terms of trying to be persuasive in terms of why rezoning around the university is a good strategy. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's something to look at. And so, yeah, so I think for now, maybe North Amherst is, I think it can still be discussed by the subcommittee. Does it shrink? Do we modify it? Do we allow parts of those places to be redeveloped out of really high density, but maybe not the others? And so, and it could go on this list, but maybe it's not going to be a priority that we try to push for May of this year. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just want to say, the previous people on the subcommittee have worked really hard on that, and it's not quite at a stage where to me it's ready to go on a shelf for later. I think it would be nice to get it a little farther along. That way, when we pull it off the shelf, if we want to pitch it, a year from now, it's actually ready to go. And I feel like putting it completely away is going to make that a lot harder for us to return to completely cold a year from now. So I would support Bruce's idea of trying to push it. And I would love to push it this year. I mean, the changes to the PRP is located in 3 different parts of town. And so increasing, allowing housing in the PRP alone would be trying to distribute housing and pull it away from the center of campus. So you're right that I think it would be easier to sell with the East Amherst stuff as well. But I think there's a way to pitch it as even this year.
Okay, Jesse.
Thanks. I guess maybe it's too in the weeds for right now about North Amherst. I'm a little confused by the conversation you're reporting, Nate, because I thought all the work we're doing on this idea of an overlay, just like University Drive, is just changing the maximum allowable. There's no requirement to get 3 times as dense. It's just allowing up to that much. So I'm confused when people say, oh, meeting that target doesn't work because of these reasons. Like I don't, again, maybe obviously I wasn't at the conversations, but I don't understand that position. If the owner's just saying, no, we don't want to do anything because we're making a lot of money, fine, I understand that. I don't understand someone saying, well, we have to do it we have to reach 3 times, so we can't do that. But anyway, maybe we can talk more about that at the subcommittee.
No, it's a good question. I think so for the owners, right? A lot of the owners are making money and they're comfortable, and the 3 times might not even be enough to incentivize them to use the overlays. Is kind of what it's getting at, right? Because it is, one of them was saying it's a really complex financially to, make that work with vacant units and all these things, and so it was almost like they just didn't even want to, maybe it was like 5 times or something. They would have been like, great, I'll do it. But at 3 times, they just thought it was too much work to figure out how to do it.
Got it. Thanks. Maybe I misheard what you said.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And I agree. It's you don't have to do it that much. So yeah, I don't, I agree. I think the North Amherst one is tricky. And I feel like if we want to move it forward, like I said, I like the idea of Bruce's idea of like editorials or maybe getting more public about it, because I think when it first came out, people were really surprised, like, oh wow, what does all this mean? And a lot of people in North Amherst were, if they weren't upset, they were confused or wanted to know more. And so, like I said, I don't want to like have that become a lightning rod for all these other things the planning board or staff is working on, and have this reflexive kind of reaction from everyone being like, oh my gosh, you're just trying to densify, do off-campus student housing. At the same time, we're trying to do other things. And I agree with Jesse that it's hard to balance that and say, well, we're going to create more housing over here that's typically not going to be students. And someone will say, well, how is it not going to be for students if the market is the market? And so, yeah, I think there's different ways to do that. To the PRP, Angus, I will say quickly, staff started looking at it, and for the board, you might, I think I mentioned this, but a lot of the PRP, they're big areas zoned in town. There's 3 areas, and say they're like 50, 60, whatever, 70 acres. Say the one in East Amherst that's off Belchertown Road and Larkspur Drive. It looks like roughly maybe there's like 10 to 15 acres at most out of that whole PRP that could be developed, that isn't already developed, because it's all wetland or riverfront or whatever, right? Steep slopes. And so I think 10 or 15 acres is still worth it to look at it. But it's not like it's not like I look at that and I'm like, oh wow, we're gonna have like new neighborhoods and streets. It might look like that because it's undeveloped right now, but once you start putting all these different land use constraints on there, it quickly shrinks. North Amherst is the same way, and the one in East Amherst or on Route 9 by Greenleaves is the same way. There are pockets of areas that to me would be worth allowing housing in PRP, because some owners have said, yeah, no, I've tried doing something, nothing's been going on right for years on those say 10 or 15 acres. And so the idea would be we wouldn't take away what the PRP allows. We would add housing to it. And so, some of the question now would be, well, if you can't do these neighborhoods or do this kind of nice new subdivision method, and you only get a 3-acre area, to me, that's then like, really dense cottage style housing, or it's going to be a multi-unit building, like an apartment building, because otherwise no one's going to, 3 acres, no one's going to, maybe someone will do 3 frontage lots, but I think we want to do more or something different. And so anyway, staff's looking at that, like, okay, what does that actually mean in the PRP? So I think, maybe it can happen quickly. Maybe it doesn't, but my goal is to try to work on it, bring it to the board, shop it around with staff and say, here's kind of where we are with it in a few months.
Can I just ask one follow-up question?
Yep.
For the Puffton Village people, I mean, if they wanted to build an additional building that's exactly like one of their current buildings, that's currently banned by the zoning. that falls under, correct?
They would be considered, they can do it through a special permit.
Okay.
So that I think the difficulty right now is a lot of those apartment complexes, after they're built, we change the zoning. So they're considered pre-existing non-conforming. Through a special permit process, they can modify their properties. It's just that most owners and most developers will not go through a special permit process because, it could be denied.
Yeah.
And so when this was first examined years ago, it was townwide at every multi-unit apartment complex that became non-conforming, and there's a lot. And it could be as simple as trying to make it say that any changes could just be by site plan review. I mean, it could be, it doesn't have to be this massive kind of thing like triple density. But I think as staff, when we heard from consultants, they said, well, to really incentivize redevelopment, you want this increased density. But it could be that we create this kind of overlay, and all it says is that, we can make it really simple, like some of the changes are just site plan review. And is that then enough to say maybe Puffton Village will come in and say, oh, I'm going to add 40 units? Because right now they don't even want to do the special permit to do anything because it's
Right.
too much, right? And so there could be like these extremes of what the overlay is, or kind of, different kind of levels of it. And so, again, maybe that's part of the discussion the subcommittee still has, like what could be something. I think everyone got scared when we said 3 times the density, but that's what the comprehensive housing market study said. That's what, a few consultants said is like the minimum you would want to do to kind of have a whole redevelopment of that property. And maybe that's one approach, but maybe the other approach is we allow, we could allow new apartment buildings by site plan review in this overlay. And we change the definition of apartments in the overlay. We don't cap it at 20 units. Maybe someone will come out and say, oh, I want to do an apartment building here on my property. And they don't have to tear down their whole site. They just, maybe they tear down a few units and they put an 80-unit apartment building. And maybe that's just a new, I haven't really, I think the overlay was going to allow all of that anyways, but maybe we just have to see, how does it really, and is there a way to, make sure it can be used that simply, right? Like, as opposed to, oh, wow, we're tripling the density. Maybe Puffton just says, I want to do a 50-unit apartment building here, and that's good enough.
All right. I mean, Nate, that sounds like an interesting line of inquiry. I assume you would include some sort of limit, like, residential units up to 5 stories in height and 200 units could be added with site plan review.
Yeah, I think and even with the North Amherst, I found other communities, especially if it's an overlay, you can do like a prerequisite meeting with staff, and they have to come with even concept plans. And so you can really kind of have a focused conversation about this. So if they were to use the overlay, it's voluntary. To do that, you have to come in and have like a pre-application filing and meeting. And so, staff can help guide that conversation. Someone might come in and just do, something that just doesn't work, right? And we can kind of guide that before it gets to a full application. And so, like I said, I think there was a lot of work that was put in North Amherst. I still value it. And so maybe we modify it or we apply it, if we're going to do East Amherst, we can apply some of those same lessons learned in East Amherst when it comes time.
All right.
And so, yeah, I mean, if we're looking at this list, I'd be curious to know what, reorganize it, move it. Do we like the subcommittee items, staff items? I mean, some of it would be, right, like I said, I want to, maybe this is ambitious, but just how do we pick a few things and really focus in on it? So, start putting, pen to paper and mapping it, and, collectively, how do we, push this forward? Subcommittees talked about this a few times. You kind of have parameters. And so, next time subcommittee meets, like if we like this, like we start, getting a framework for zoning. And, I emailed the Mansfield one. It was kind of simple. Our cluster development bylaw is really messy in my mind. It's kind of a lot. Do we just come up with a new subdivision development method that is simply written, and that maybe that's a conversation for the subcommittee, right? And same with mixed use buildings. But I kind of want, planning board, right? Do we like kind of this direction of these priorities for staff in the subcommittee? and then we can move forward on it.
Why don't you go ahead, Bruce?
Two things, Nate. First of all, I want to go back and beat my pony just one more stripe. I know this is your list. I acknowledge that, and you're resisting wanting to put any explicatory paragraph associated with these. But I will say that Doug a moment ago asked you what's the difference between 1 and 3, and if there was a sentence following each of those, that question would not need to be asked. And that's essentially my concern or my aspiration here. And I'm wondering whether perhaps the problem is that you see this as, you see yourself as the audience for this, and not anybody else. And maybe that's, maybe that, because to the extent that I'm the audience, I need more than you're giving. But I can function without it. It just makes it a little more difficult. And this, as I said, is a better list, and it works for me. But back to this, what you mentioned just a moment ago about number 1, that the subdivision method and so forth, and whether that's updating the cluster development is more trouble than it's worth. I know we had a bit of a discussion. I think it was at the last board meeting, because we haven't had a housing subcommittee meeting in the interim. And it was, I was suggesting that we think about how we could skirt the 40Y or achieve the 40Y objective within the subdivision by putting a limit on size. And there was some discussion that might be difficult, or that might even not be legally possible in this state, and that we could perhaps do the same, in other words, to limit size by doing it with setbacks and so forth. And I did a little bit of back of the envelope sketching on that, and my conclusion is that I don't think we can, because even with a 5,000 square foot lot, which is probably pretty small, and having a front yard setback of 25 feet and a rear yard setback of 30 and 10 foot on either side, you still get a footprint, you know, in the 1,400 square foot. And if it's a 2-story house, you're back into the 2,500 square foot house, which is bigger than we want to satisfy the starter home buyer. So it seems to me that I agree with you that this might be difficult, and maybe the 40Y approach that we initially thought was going to be a bit clumsy, or for some reason wasn't as perhaps as easy to implement or to move forward, as simply making the a 40Y equivalent ourselves, using something like this. Oh, my dog just fell down the stairs. Oh well. Using this method here, but it does seem as though if we aren't able to do what 40Y does, and to defensively limit the size of a house to something in the order of 14 or 1,500 square feet, then then we would be better off going with the 40Y approach. And so this first item probably should incorporate some evaluation of the state's 40Y option versus the homegrown version, which is expressed here.
All right. Nate, any response to that?
No, I think, Bruce, I agree. I think having a clarifying statement, I was just worried that that would grow into paragraphs for each of these priorities. And so I think if, for instance, if when the subcommittee meets next, I think the task would be to have a purpose or goal statement for each of these. And I can have a draft statement, and the subcommittee can then, work on it. And then staff can do that for these. I think what I was hoping to do is just have kind of this concise list just for easy viewing. Because if we start having paragraphs, we might not be able to see this in one glance. And so if we like this list, then I think I can start expanding the items. Before there was so much on the list, there was like 30 items. It just felt overwhelming to try to expand them. Sometimes I'm not even sure, right? Like I have an idea of what I think cottage style housing is, so I can put a purpose, and then maybe the subcommittee, you guys have different ideas of what that means.
Yeah. Well, keep the title, the subject titles there, and put the explicatory paragraph in a font that's 2 sizes smaller than that. So you keep the fundamental list, and then you have but I'll probably keep badgering you about this, but I'll try not to be annoying more than
I'll tell you to keep emailing me every week, Bruce. That's what I tell people.
Mm-hmm.
Remind me by emailing me, and that's okay.
Okay.
But just
Well,
quickly,
I could try and write this myself, but I don't know that I know enough. But
Right.
maybe that's not the point.
just quickly about the housing size. Yeah, I think through these conversations the board's had in the last few months, even about students and about the housing size, yeah, I have questions myself, and I feel like I'm getting to the point where I want to, it's like I want to ask the state or attorneys, like, can we, in this, if we do the subdivision method, like a 40Y, say you cap the size of a dwelling unit at 1,850 square feet. The state can do it because they are implementing this, this 40Y and their new regulations. They might say, oh, community, you can't do that. You have to do the 40Y.
Yep, that's
I
the
have the
problem.
same question, say about students or other things. Like, why couldn't we say, and it's like students aren't a protected class. It's hard to go down this route. The board's talked about this before, but could you say in apartments with X number of units, students can only occupy 50% of those units? Can we say that because students aren't a protected class? I've read articles, I've talked to an attorney years ago, and they're like, it's pretty ugly. You have to then be really consistent with how you apply it. Graduate students, undergrads, blah, blah, blah. The notion was just don't do it.
Yeah.
But the question keeps coming up, and it's like, well, I don't know. I've never really gotten a great answer recently. And so, if we upzone some of these neighborhoods in East Amherst, could we say that half the unit, a maximum of half the units can be students?
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that, but for
Well,
instance,
this is why you have to define a student house or a student home,
right?
because unless you define the entity, you can't police it.
And then there's maybe other ways to do it, like you increase the inclusionary zoning percentage, but you go to a higher AMI because students don't qualify, say, for those units. So you could do like up to 150% AMI. So it's like a roundabout way to try to get at it. I don't, but through these conversations in the last 6 months, year, I have some of these questions that, typically we're like, zoning can't do this, zoning can't do this. But it's like, well, all of a sudden 40Y comes out and says, they say the most you can have is a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath house at 1,850 square feet. Like, I didn't think zoning could say that, but now all of a sudden it's saying it.
All right. Johanna.
Thank you. I'm sitting here trying to synthesize everything that's been said and share a little bit of my thoughts. So, big picture, I think the way that we solve a lot of our problems are by increasing supply. That helps with both affordability, student rentals, and, kind of all of the things. So I still think that should be our top priority. When I look at the housing production plan stuff, Nate, I'm like, you got 3 things got 3 votes, or 2 things got 3 votes. So that gives you a sense of the priorities. So it's A2 and D1, which is let's increase density in some designated areas, and let's make sure we're dealing with student stuff. And then when I look at this list, I see certainly the mixed use building standards in the outlying village centers would kind of fit under A2. The cottage style potentially, especially if it includes townhouses. So I guess insofar as the subcommittee is working on the cottage style housing and the traditional neighborhood subdevelopment, I would just keep in mind the master plan, that we don't just want to build housing everywhere, but we want to direct it to our downtown and our village centers, kind of smart growth principles. And then what I don't see in here is actually like some kind of concerted effort to identify areas of town to upzone. I mean, the North Amherst piece a little bit, although the comments last week gave me some pause around whether that's the best use of our time. And then on what the staff is prioritizing, like my hope is that the downtown design standards get to a place where we can really add a significant number of units to our downtown once we have those standards in place. So I see that as fitting, pretty squarely in both priorities, but primarily the A2. And then the East Amherst study also strikes me as like, all right, that's a main thoroughfare. We think it makes sense to add density there. So that's me kind of synthesizing. So I think, a lot of this stuff is heading in the right direction, as far as I'm concerned. And I mostly just want to see us make some progress. And I love your idea of creating a cycle of things to bring before the town council, because not every idea that comes before the town council is going to succeed. So, having an iterative approach, and giving them different things to react to, I think could be really helpful. And then I liked Bruce's idea of, insofar as we are prioritizing things, let's make sure we tag the relevant parts of the housing production plan or the master plan, so that it's kind of like, yeah, we're following the roadmap that is the vision that we've adopted. Okay, that's what I have. Thank you.
That was Angus.
Oh, that was Angus. Sorry, Bruce.
All right, thank you, Johanna.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. Yeah, it's interesting. Areas of town to upzone, it is interesting. We don't really have it explicitly in this list. I think the downtown design standards, the idea is that they will be made public next month. There'll be a series of meetings with, the planning board and other boards and committees, public. I guess I'm not sure where that will go, right? So to implement the design standards, there's a lot of pieces to it. Some of it's zoning, some of it could be maybe in the planning board rules and regs, but to really do it could take a lot. And so, it depends on how kind of the reception of what happens, say, in the next 6 months. Are people excited by it and think it can work? And could we really try to move it fast pace, or is it something that's going to be, implemented in phases, and really then it's going to take, 2 years to get the stuff, the regulations in place to implement the design standards. I'm not even sure, right? It seems like, there's some positives. People like it, people might not like it, so I'm just kind of curious to see how that rollout, what kind of the reception is in those 6 months. Because yeah, I do think that the idea was to me, have some predictability for downtown and also allow more infill. I think it's the right place for it, right? As are some other village centers in other areas. And so, maybe not everyone likes some of the standards, then does it get tweaked a little bit, but can it then be implemented kind of quickly, right? So to me, I see what happens downtown if we have buildings, everyone, people will complain about, say, the new modern buildings. I don't know, it's hard to say, is it what exactly is it about it? Is it the setbacks? Is it the window pattern? Is it the material? And maybe these standards will be a way to address that. So it's actually predictable for a developer, for abutters, for the board, and can get through easy permitting. But I will say the downtown design standards, right, is more than just that. It's kind of like this vision of what could happen downtown. And so when it rolls out, I'm hoping it can go smoothly. It may be that it, is a protracted process and needs more discussion. So it's ongoing. Like I said, it's hoping to get public next month. In East Amherst, same thing. The idea, I'd love to have it be kind of concluded within, if we have someone on board in a few months, give 10 months and have this study. They're going to assess the existing zoning in East Amherst. We kind of have to work with the board to find this geographic area. And then the point of the grant was to then suggest ways to increase density and development in that area, whether through a 40R or through zoning changes or through different ideas, and develop some concepts of what that might look like in East Amherst. And so It could be, we're hoping it'll be kind of a truncated process in that area that would, result in some zoning changes. And it could be that it simplifies the zoning. So in East Amherst, there's commercial, there's RVC, there's BVC, and there's a lot of others. And maybe the suggestion is everything just goes to BVC, and you increase the height in the BVC, and you allow these uses differently. And maybe that's what comes out of the East Amherst study. And then it's then on the board, right, and staff say, okay, we like that. Let's try to move it forward and adopt it. But anyways, areas of town to upzone. Yeah, I kind of, I write that down. It's interesting. To me, it could be cottage style. It could be, we apply it in certain zones. So we allow this kind of infill of multi-unit on a property in these zones. And I think that's something that hasn't really been discussed, right? Like, what does that actually mean? This traditional neighborhood subdivision, I agree, we don't want sprawl everywhere, but when the subcommittee talked about it, we had some parameters in terms of, say, property size. And the idea would be like, right now, in these outlying residential districts, someone would come in, maybe they do a subdivision, and they get these, acre and a half lots, and you get, 10 lots on 20 acres. But maybe through this method, you could either do the whole lot, or you do half of it and you get 30 lots on 15 acres. So that, you could preserve open space and you get more density and less area than what our current subdivision methods allow. And so I think the subcommittee saw it as something that, it increases density in that area, but it's not, contributing to sprawl, and it's also hopefully getting to be, more affordable homes in a different way for fee simple home ownership. Again, and maybe the idea would be that it applies in certain zoning districts, kind of like these other, we have development methods in our bylaw, like cluster development, open space conservation development. And so this would be a development method in that applied in these zoning districts, and we have kind of these parameters on how it works.
So, Johanna, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm coming back to, we talked for a while about the row house idea, and that there are some spots in town where that could be really appropriate. Where does that fit in here?
I'm not sure it does, or if it does, we could talk about it. Is it part of the East Amherst study? Some of it is like, how much do we actually research and study? And it could be an ongoing thing for the subcommittee. I just feel like, all of a sudden the list keeps growing again. And it's like, where do we, it's not off the list, right? We still have that other zoning list. I just wanted to kind of, shrink it and have it here. And then if we really like that row house idea, do we take something off? Because I want to be realistic. Like, all of a sudden now we have 5 things for the subcommittee. We have, 10 things for staff. That's a lot. And so I still think it's a worthwhile thing. Maybe as we talk about cottage style housing, if the subcommittee talks about it, it's like, oh, maybe row housing is it. And maybe that gets modified and tweaked a little bit or something. And it changes. But, to me, this would be the placeholder where we talk about some of these kind of medium density things. And what does it actually mean? The subcommittee can talk about it. I'll try to get a statement written for each of these, and we can kind of, flesh it out a little bit more.
Nate, do we have a lot of vacant developable land?
Not really.
Okay, that's what I thought. So both number 1 and number 3, I view as relatively low yield.
Oh, okay.
Unless people are gonna, buy 5 or 10 houses in some subdivision and, assemble a big parcel that they can use to densify the area. So, I'd put student housing at the top, and maybe mixed use number 2, because, I'd like to be able to build up our downtown or our village centers a little bit more. So, in North Amherst, I mean, might as well be up there. But you know, both the 40Y, both number 1 and both number 3, just don't feel like they're going to be very impactful, I guess. And you know, if we had a whole lot of farmland in Hadley and in Amherst, maybe, you know, we would have people that had 20 acres they could develop, but we don't have very much of that. So I'm kind of with Johanna. I think, you know, where are we willing to upzone with the possibility that people might tear down what's there and make it denser? So but I haven't been in the subcommittee meetings. I don't know, maybe you guys have spent a lot of time on 1 and 3 and it seems fruitful. Angus.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit on behalf of the subcommittee. I think both number 1 and number 3 we're imagining with much smaller parcels of land than than we traditionally think of for subdivisions. Especially number 3. I mean, like number 3, I think we're imagining you could actually do on a fairly large single family lot, potentially. But I take your point that they are both probably lower yield in terms of getting a bunch more housing quickly, and they're also more complicated. So at least, you know, the idea of moving number 2, the modified mixed use buildings, I mean, I think that's something we could actually aim for May, even. I mean, that's not that complicated. Changing a few definitions around that to maybe make it easier for people to build more mixed use buildings that have more housing, but also, you know, facilitate the kind of life of the community. I think that's great, and that's a lighter lift than developing an entire new subdivision method. So student housing, I think we as a committee, as a planning board, maybe need to talk a little bit more about. And I don't know if now is the time, but I wonder if we need to talk about what Jesse was trying to get us to kind of commit to last week, which is do we as a planning board feel that it's worthwhile to pursue limitations or spacing on student housing, separate from the supply issue of trying to find, you know, and build more student housing.
Well, maybe we should put that on the agenda next time and just have a designated conversation about that topic.
I think.
And can I just add one other thing, Nate?
Sorry, Angus.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, I mean, I don't know if it's possible to, that conversation might go very differently if we had legal advice on whether it's possible to do spacing. So I don't know what that process could look like, but I would imagine that it would be a different conversation if we know it's legally possible than if we don't know that it's legally possible.
Nate, is that something KP Law could advise us on?
Yeah, I think I can talk to staff about, you know, how, so I think later on the agenda under housing, we do have, you know, limitations on student housing, the memo possibly to say if it's the town manager's office. Yeah, no, I have some of these questions myself. And so, like I said, it's almost getting to the point where we need kind of some direction because, you know, we can keep talking about this or we can, you know, be told that, you know, it's just not really going to work.
Mhm.
And we have to then figure out another solution. So, yeah, I think you know, I think it's something I can follow up with, you know, my supervisors on about how do we get some assistance there.
Okay. Jesse, and then I noticed it's 8 o'clock. Maybe we want to break.
Thanks. I'm just on the legality question, just reminding us, and Angus, I don't think you were on the board. I think this came up 2 or 3 times where I think, Nate, you did ask KPLA certain questions, and my recollection is the responses were always, well, it could be challenged. Never, you can't do that, it's illegal. And we've had differing opinions about how to interpret that. My own is if we think that's what our town needs to do, we should do it. And maybe it gets challenged, and maybe it's upheld, and maybe it's not. But the fear of litigation, to me, on something that's so substantial, shouldn't convince us not to try and do it. Nate, am I remembering correctly?
No, yeah, you are, and you know, the town attorneys are going to have the town's best interest in mind, right? And so,
Of course, but so do I, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, is it worth like that risk, right? Like, are we willing to try something and see if people push back against it? Do we propose something and then the developers start pushing back against it? And maybe that'd be a good thing because then they could actually tell us what they think. Because it's really hard to get them to the table sometimes. So yeah, I think that there's some validity there. Just quickly about Doug, to your comment, I agree that there's might not be a lot of unit yield with these methods, but I think they're important because they provide a different housing type than what we've been allowing. And I think that's where the subcommittee was kind of excited by this traditional neighborhood subdivision method, is that it's a fee simple ownership structure as opposed to just big multi-unit buildings. And cottage style housing to me could be allowing 4 to 8 units in RG and RN on an acre, where we don't now. And so it doesn't, we could say that under the cottage style zoning, you could have a mix of 1, 2s and townhouses on properties, and we come up with kind of this flexible infill method, and we figure out how to apply it. And so, yeah, it might be used like 5 times, and I'm getting 18 units or whatever, but it's a different kind of unit than a 60-unit building. And so there's to me there's some there's some validity in having kind of a parallel approach for those kinds of measures.
Okay. Well, I guess, the thing that comes to mind when you talk about trying to encourage more fee simple properties, that of lower value that could be created, rather than coming up with something that's kind of requires a blank slate, let's just take the minimum lot size and cut it, by a quarter, and allow me to split my half acre into 2 quarter acres, and sell off the ADU that I built. Not that I did, but so that we actually do it, allow it through infill rather than out at the edge of the development in town, wherever the farmland is. All right, we've got Bruce and then Jesse.
Nate, if we are going to entertain a discussion about this minimum distancing concept, which is what State College in Pennsylvania does, but I don't think anyone else that I know of in the country has actually got something on the books for that. Would it be the best then to give KP Law the State College, the portion of the State College town bylaw that enables this, so that they've got something that they can express an opinion on, or would that be helpful in this case, this situation?
Yeah, I think yeah, it would, and I think I would talk with Jeff and Dave and others, and probably have a few questions I'd want to ask, and then I might reach out to you, Bruce or Jesse or others, and say, can you provide some helpful information? And so to me, it's not just minimum distancing. It's like, say the definition of a student home, or
oh yes, you can't do one without the other. You have to know what you're regulating.
And then even is there ways to limit student housing through zoning? Could be a general question, but and then get more specifics and kind of have a series of questions, because like Jesse said, I think the answer will be maybe, if not no, could be likely to be challenged legally. And so,
Yeah.
It's right. So, I think it is hard when we look at other states, planning board, you probably know this, right? But there's different, different enabling legislation, different statutes and laws. And so it's hard to look at Pennsylvania or Colorado and then say, oh, well, let's apply it in Massachusetts because Massachusetts has different laws. So even though, it might be similar in terms of, it's a college community, legally it's a whole different.
Oh yes, of course it is. But that's why you're not saying, can we use this law, but can we use this concept? And the State College draft is used to more specifically explain the concept.
Right.
And so therefore there's a legal question which goes to KP Law, and then there's another question which is how it's enforced and so forth. And what I think I know about it is that it takes a significant leap in staff administrative time to enforce minimum distancing. I mean, considerable. And so the other way in which the other question to ask is, would we be able to do what they've done, which is which enables this just from an economic standpoint, which is to charge $1,000 or $2,000 as a license for a student house. So once you've got the student house, you charge. It's like a medallion in the in the New York taxi situation. You can't drive the taxi unless you buy the medallion. You can't operate a student house unless you buy the entitlement, and that fee, which may or may not be a one-time fee, is what funds the 2 or 3 more staff people you need to be circulating around and managing this whole thing. It's cumbersome, but it seems to be working according to someone's standards in one other place at least. So it's not entirely crazy, but it does seem to be a stretch, and which is why I gave up thinking that it was a useful way. But if we want to have a discussion about it, I think we need to know those two things. Can we charge a premium on a student home, and are we allowed to enact a minimum distancing type of bylaw in this state? Once we know the answer to those two things, then we can have a useful discussion, perhaps, or at least it won't be a useless discussion necessarily.
I like the idea of a golden ticket, a golden medallion. It's a commodity then that is valuable if we limit them.
Nate,
Commodity was the word that was used in when I was discussing this with folks in other states. It creates a commodity. Yes, exactly.
Nate, I was trying to remember the zoning amendment that the board recommended to town council, I think last summer, that went to council and then they just refused to recommend it. Didn't that include some student housing provisions?
It did. It was, in like a definition. I think there was, some pushback about, well, what is a student? Is it, continuing education students? Is it adults?
Yeah.
With one of the household mate, one of the, caregivers going back to school. And so, yeah, so I think there was concern about that it could be have, kind of unintended consequences and impacts. And so, to me, it was like, well, then we'd have to refine the definition a bit more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there was concern about that. And I think, we'll be honest that, if we come up with the student home definition, the idea is we'd want to use it somehow. And I think there's always been some concern about, is it a negative or is it a positive? And I think, to me, it's like, well, if we think we can do it, then let's figure out how to use it in a few different ways. Maybe it's limiting it, but then maybe we come up with a place where we actually say we want student homes, right? So it's like, you can't have student homes here, but you know what? We're going to say in this area, you can have as many student homes on a property as you want, and you can have big apartment buildings, and it's going to be student homes. And it's different than what we do now and saying it's an apartment building. And so maybe by having that definition, it gives us the ability to do a few different things, so yeah, I think
Yeah, I guess to me, the council's rejection of that is kind of a cautionary thing as we talk about trying to do, take another run at this. So I guess, I at least am having trouble remembering exactly how that proposal read. So it might be useful to just share that with everybody, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I was going to say just quickly to something Johanna had said earlier, and I think when I first 10 years ago, I saw your hand, Jesse. The town would propose zoning amendments. There was a zoning subcommittee in the early 2000 teens and up until the teens, and we'd get these ideas going. Staff would get ideas with a subcommittee, and maybe they go to town meeting or not, but then we just like keep moving on to something else, and we never really kind of had a nice running list to reflect back on. And so what I'd like to do with the longer list, say like every year, bring it back to the planning board and say, okay, here's where we are, because the overlay for apartment complexes was discussed in 2013. It got a little complicated, and then basically it just no one picked it back up again for years. And I feel like you know, it probably should have been looked at again, and it could have been then adopted in 2015 and been in place for 10 years and actually been useful. And so, it's been 10 years where this idea was first discussed, and then it lost traction, and everyone just kind of moved on. And maybe that's okay, but I'd like to have a better way of cataloging things, because maybe like this doesn't move forward right now, but maybe in 2 years we're like, actually, could we modify it and tweak it and bring it back again in a different form, as opposed to just abandoning things that board and subcommittee talked about for a number of months or something. And so we never really kept a good list. And so I like the idea of trying to have this iterative process of learning, and then kind of remembering where we were. And so we could always say, okay, here's where we were the last 2 years. Here's what we've done. What do we think, it informs us in year 3? And maybe we do all new things, but at least we have that ability to look back. I just think that's important, because we hadn't really been doing that. And so, yeah.
Well, I will say I would support doing that, but I think you and staff are the people to do that because of the way the board rotates on and off, and it's just hard for us to keep track of things.
No, agreed. Yeah, I think staff's trying to get better and kind of more systematic about some of this.
All right, I don't see any hands at the moment. I think we kind of melded several of our housing agenda items into this conversation. So why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back at, let's say, 20 after 8, and I think we've covered most of the housing stuff. Nate, I think the last item, the memo, you might want to talk about when we come back, and then we can move on. I will also at that point ask for any of the members of the 3 members of the public, if any of them want to make a comment about this before we leave it. All right, thank you. See you in 5 minutes. All right, I have 21 minutes after 8. Please turn on your camera as you come on back.
After 8.
Doug, I wanted to share, I am solo parenting tonight, and there's a chance I might need to drop off a little bit early to just manage stuff here on the home front.
All right, well,
I will let you, yeah,
hope everything is going all right. So,
thank you.
okay, well, stay or go away and come back.
I'm good for now, but in like 10 or 15 minutes, I might drop off.
Okay. All right, looks like we got everyone but Nate.
Sorry, time goes by too fast.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to get through that 5 minutes.
It doesn't.
So Nate, it looks to me like we've gotten through most of agenda items 3, 4, and 5. And you know, the last item was the possible memo. That's the one that I don't think we've really touched on at all. Maybe if you agree that we've gotten through most of the rest of that, should we just talk about the memo for a minute and then move on?
Yeah, Jesse, I see your hand. I will say, some of it was based on what Jara had said at the last meeting, and he's not here. I still can put it out there, and we can, talk about it at the next meeting as well. But, Jesse, if you want to, I don't
Yeah,
mind.
Jesse.
Sure, thank you. I was gonna comment on some of this before. I thought I'd wait till after the break, these other agenda items, but if we're skipping, if you allow me, Doug, I'd like to hijack for like 4 minutes to
Okay.
address some of these things. The first was just to add some memory about the student home definition that, yes, did go to council. We had proposed that simply as a definition with no purpose. And I think that was our intent, to say we just need to define so we can start having the conversations, but clearly that didn't work. And I think if we were going to revisit it, I've certainly thought a lot about how else we could approach this as a thing to have on our books. I think it might need to have some purpose. The other piece of that, I want to remind everyone, I think the Affordable Housing Committee got wind of this idea and asked me to come meet with them and share what we were talking about, which I did. And I was heartily vilified at even the suggestion that we might think about having a student home definition. And I've thought a lot about that too, and happy to share more details some other time. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
The second thing, I was gonna sort of mostly save this for subcommittee, but if I'm permitted to share my screen, I'd like to share something with you all strictly for food for thought for future conversations, because it touches on a lot of what we just discussed for an hour. So am I allowed to share? I am, great. So I'll just do this really quickly. Again, the idea is not for a ton of input right now. You all can see my screen, I hope, right? Yes?
Mhm.
Great.
Yes.
So this is UMass, right? We all know that, roughly speaking, not fancy tools like Nate could do for us. I started thinking, if we're not going to have define student homes, if we're not going to have small overlays, if we're going to try and think about things with big impact, thinking about the petitions that came to our resident petitions that came that we discussed briefly, what kind of things can make big impact? So coalescing a lot of ideas, I thought about what's close to the university. Sort of sketched out here. I've counted more than 300 single family lots. I believe about 50% of them are rented. Full disclosure, this touches my house. It touches Bruce's house. So it's definitely in my backyard. It's not at all not in my backyard. But I started thinking about, what if we took an approach of just saying, here's all these single family lots already mostly rented. How do we increase density on these? And it touches on all the things we just talked about, right? So obviously tons of things to work out. I don't know how we would accomplish this, but right now rental maybe has 4 people per lot. If we could increase that to 4 or 5 units, these are the kind of numbers we generate in one swoop. And we could allow lots of different types. Could be small apartment buildings, it could be row housing, it could be cottage style. The point is to get to that density on small, one at a time. We have lots of standards so that we still maintain some town feeling, however that plays out. Things like generous frontage, maximum number of cars visible from the street, setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. But it potentially is a way to get a pretty significant impact, probably not very quickly, but if this were adopted by these single lot owners over the next 4 to 10 years, and they could quadruple, quintuple the density, it could make a pretty big impact on the student beds available. Because again, I think this would largely be student housing. Lots of ways to refine this, lots of ideas we just talked about. This isn't at all original from my brain. It's coalescing just a lot of things that have been talked about. I already know many people have strong objections to touching many of these neighborhoods in this way, just things to think about. And yeah, so I'll just stop there, putting that out there for all of us to ponder.
Okay, great. Did you do that with Photoshop?
Mostly PowerPoint, honestly.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah, though, there are nice graphics, Jesse. I think, staff had talked about this, we have this 4 unrelated limit. And kind of, when we started with the rental permitting and now there's a bylaw, could we actually allow more than 4 unrelated if it's based on a certain size of the house? And if they meet, standards of living conditions, right, and you can regulate parking and a few things, does it really matter if you have a 5,000 square foot home and you have 20 people living in there, if it can legally house those people safely according to building code, fire code, and other things? It actually is a much more efficient way to house someone. I mean, 20 is an exaggeration, but
well, I agree, and it's already happening to a large extent anyway.
right.
So
So
if we can make it safer, great.
but what you just said is kind of interesting. To me, I wrote like, could we do increase for unrelated in certain areas? And so that, there are areas where you can have a multiplier effect, kind of like what you're just showing, because, the structures can allow it. It's not like, you don't even have to add anything. You don't even have to add any more footprint. The structures allow it. And so if through safety, building code, rental permitting, we can allow that, is that a good thing? We kind of people shied away from it when this was discussed 2 years ago or whatever, but I don't know, after this is just kind of interesting based on your analysis, jog my memory. It's like, why could we look at that again?
Yeah. I mean, I was mostly working on the idea of, some distance from campus.
Right.
And, as a town, we just have to agree that this is the right place to allow this kind of density. I like that idea too, Nate. I mean, yeah.
Yep. Angus.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jesse. And at a minimum, even just changing some of those thoroughfares to like RVC would open up a lot of options that are not currently possible, that would get us closer to that. Changing Puffton Village and these other parts of North Amherst overlay that we're considering into RVC would open up more options under site plan review. So like, I think there's some very simple things that we could potentially do that would help that. So that's great.
Footnote M comes to mind too.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I guess not seeing any hands. We're down to one member of the public. That member of the public, do you want to make a public comment? I do not see any hand or that person's hand in response to my offer.
Maura's probably here for the indie.
Yeah, no, I realize that.
Just quickly, Doug, I just want to mention, I think I'll wait on the memo until Jara's here. We have a full board, but after the last meeting with Jeff, there was a lot of comments about transparency and leadership and other things around student housing. We've talked about it tonight. And so, I don't know if I mentioned it then, but I think maybe an action item for the board is, write a memo to the town manager and the assistant town manager, expressing, kind of issues, challenges, and opportunities around students and what you'd want to see. And so, because I think you could take the information we've talked about and put it in a page or two memo and just have it be succinct. And so that's all it was. And so I think, to me, Jared seemed like he had a lot of those ideas. And so I want to just have him, I was actually going to ask him if he'd write the memo, the draft for the board to look at. And then, the board could endorse it and send it off. And so, I'd want to make sure it's has a few different things in it, but really it's kind of the board's memo, just kind of taking off of what I heard last meeting. I just thought maybe it'd be important to encapsulate that in a written document more than just the minutes that gets sent to a few people. That's all. It seemed like it was important enough, and so that's where it came from.
All right. Okay, time is 8:32. We'll go on. Are we done with housing? Anybody? All right, good. So old business. Pam, any old business not reasonably anticipated?
I
Pam or
didn't,
Nate?
but Nate,
I
Nope.
don't think so.
And similarly for new business? Nope.
I don't have any there either.
All right, Form A&R subdivision applications? Nothing?
No,
Upcoming ZBA applications, anything new? I know you've mentioned at least one in the last couple of meetings.
I know, Nate, is there anything new?
I don't think so. I will say that there's, with the new ADU legislation in our bylaw, there's been a few property owners, the town had allowed ADUs for years as a supplemental dwelling, kind of as a converted dwelling. And there's been a few property owners who have special permits on their property, who said, oh, like right now it's required to be an owner occupied unit because I have the supplemental apartment, but the supplemental apartment qualifies now as a protected ADU. And I think there's been a few of those, 2 or 3, that have called and said, well, what do I do? And so there's a few things they can do, but I think some of them are going to go back to the zoning board to try to remove some of the conditions of their permit or something related to that as a special permit use. So I think there's a few of those that are happening. It's not, I was kind of expected, I guess, once that legislation and our bylaw were in place, the state legislation. So, I don't know if there's anything else really. I think there's a few more things kind of coming that will be coming up with the ZBA, but just let you know that that's kind of happening related to ADUs.
Okay.
Because we had permitted them mostly through special permit for a number of years. So.
Okay. Upcoming SPP, SPR, SUB applications. There's still the one down on Southeast Street, right?
Yeah, that will be, we're hoping to have the hearing open at the next meeting, or on February 25th. So there's a proposed mixed-use building on, it's like 128, I forget the addresses, but it's 3 properties. It's behind the Cumberland Farms on the east side of Southeast Street, across from, Miramichi had done a building a number of years ago. So across the street from that. And it's a proposal for a 80-unit mixed-use building. And so we're going to open the hearing. It's going through the Conservation Commission as well. We might have a hearing or 2 on it and then continue it for a bit of time while the Conservation Commission can just solidify some of their review of the project, because there's a lot of drainage impacts. But the applicant really wants to move forward with the board. It's a special permit as well because they want to have an additional floor and height and fill on the property. So it's a site plan review use as a mixed-use building, and then it's a special permit for additional height and fill of land. So that'll likely be open on the 25th, and then it'll probably be a few hearings on that.
Is our next meeting on the 25th and not the 18th?
It is on the 25th.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
There's a holiday,
Okay.
and I can't remember exactly what it is.
All right.
It's Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Planning board committee and liaison. Bruce, PVPC, anything?
Nope. No,
All right.
nothing.
Angus, any update on CPAC?
Yeah, it's been a lot. There have been so many meetings.
You
And
sound
I
so
took them.
enthusiastic. That's great.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's a great committee, but and they make the uh panel members take minutes, and so I took minutes of the last one, which was all the deliberations. So it was
Hmm.
a big commitment. And it made me realize even more how much I appreciate what Pam does for us. But yeah, the CPA, we're having our hopefully final meeting tomorrow to kind of hash out and vote on all the proposals. The good news for especially the community housing related ones is that I think there seems to be a strong consensus around the land trust application for the Amity Street house that's being sold at a steep discount. And they're partnering with Habitat for Humanity. It's a great project. There's also a desire to fund at least some of the municipal housing trusts ask, which is great. Not the whole thing, but a significant portion of it. And then a significant portion, either 2 years or 3 years of salary for the part-time staff member who's helping out the trust. So that's actually pretty good considering how oversubscribed the CPA is. So clearly, like, people on the committee really care about community housing, and I tried to express the views of the board as best I could, and I think people also really appreciated that. So,
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Angus. I know it's a lot. I mean, the CPA committee, just for everyone, they have basically been meeting weekly, right, for like 2 months or more. So it's a big commitment.
Yeah, thank you, Angus. DRB, Nate?
Yeah, there's two things on this. Karin is still the representative, and they had a meeting the other week, and they approved. It's been a lot of it's been signs in the downtown. So, two restaurants are one is moving, and there's a new one, and they just they approved signs for those restaurants downtown. There hasn't been a lot of big projects lately, or big changes. So, it's been that. Part of this update was also to say that the chair of the design review board said, oh, could there be would the planning board discuss having a representative, an active member be a representative? And we had looked at it a number of months ago, last fall. There wasn't an opportunity. Members seemed like there wasn't time. So, I just wanted to ask again if there was someone who'd be willing to serve as the DRB rep. So technically, Karin could serve until June. She said if she'd be willing to serve. She kind of wants to be on the DRB as part of the downtown design standards, but if the planning board elected a rep, she still could attend the DRB meetings. So anyways, I just, want to put that out there that, there is some, typically we'd have an active planning board member be on the DRB, not a former planning board member, but
All
she's
right.
been willing to go and volunteer her time. So.
Okay. Is there anybody that would be interested in taking that on? And I guess I have some interest in it, so if no one else does, I won't. All right. No one is moving, so
I move that we appoint Doug Marshall to the design review board.
all right. Johanna?
I'll second that motion.
All right. You guys want to vote on it? Any other comments before we vote? Bruce?
Aye.
Fred?
Aye.
Angus?
Aye.
Jesse?
Aye, and thank you.
And Johanna?
Aye.
All right, that's 5 in favor, 1 abstention, and 1 absence, and the motion passes. All right, Nate, you can, is Erica still the chair?
She is, yes. Yep.
All right, you can tell her to email me with when the next meeting is, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll follow up, Doug. You may actually then have to get,
Oh,
sworn
I have to
in
get
or.
appointed
Yeah.
by Paul and
Yep.
go down and swear that I'll be impartial and all that stuff.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, just let me know what to do.
Sure.
All right, anything else on committee and liaison reports? Sometimes we've had the housing subcommittee in this report, but it sounds like you guys haven't met.
Correct. We were not able to meet last week, so we're meeting
Okay.
next week.
All right. All right, time is 8:41. I really don't have a report. Nate, any report from staff?
I don't have anything. Pam might. I just, I want to thank, board members for your time. I think the last two meetings, I really have enjoyed the conversation, and I think, it's laying a nice foundation for, the year to come. And so, it's something that it's important to have. I know it takes time, but I'm glad we're doing it. And so, sometimes I feel like sometimes we get so busy, the board gets so busy, say just reviewing projects or doing things, we don't have this time to kind of reflect and talk about priorities or bigger picture. And so I'm glad we're having that conversation. Uh, and subcommittee, we'll work on some of those tasks, and the idea would be that we can bring them back to the board and keep this momentum going on a few items. So thanks.
Great. Time is 8:42. Does anybody have anything else? Sounds like our next meeting is February 25th. So that's
Mhm.
3 weeks from now. Jesse?
Just logistical question, Pam or Nate, did you send the 2026 meeting dates and I just missed it? I realized they're not on my calendar. And if not, could you send them all in an email?
Sure. I may not have. I was
No, I
thinking
think
that I
you
did.
did. I think you
Okay,
did.
then I
Okay.
can probably find it. But if it's handy, if you could re-forward it, that'd be
I
appreciated.
can, no
Thank you.
problem.
Huh. I thought you did, but I have the 18th as the next meeting, so maybe I didn't look at it closely
Maybe
enough.
maybe the preliminary schedule had the 18th until we realized it was.
Maybe I sent the wrong thing. I've done things like that before.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do typically, right, we meet the first and third and we'll set out that schedule and then we kind of, verify it against holidays and other things. And so I think originally we probably had it as the 18th and then realized it wasn't a good meeting date. And so,
Okay. All right. So time is 8:43 and we are adjourned. See you on the 25th. Good night.
See-